Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all my Fossil Warrior Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for post-Battles of Legend Armageddon. We finally got the Fossil Warrior support used by Jim Cook in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. It's a really awesome deck that focuses on fusion summoning with a bunch of different rock monsters from your graveyard and also using resources from your opponent's graveyard with the spell card Fossil Fusion to get out a bunch of different fusion monsters with specific requirements in this deck based on the type of monsters you use. It's a really interesting deck that focuses on rock support, so if you're a fan of rock monsters, this is definitely the deck for you. I wanted to focus on a pure rock generic type of deck. I didn't want to use, Adamancipators or Chronomalies, any of those type of rock monsters, and just focus on some of the more generic support with the support we got for the deck all together. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. Now, I don't have all the cards. I'm missing a few for the Fossil Warrior deck. I just have a few spots that I'll show to fill in. But other than that, not looking to complete this deck because these cards will be going to a friend of mine. Normally, friends give me, cards to use for deck profiles, but this is the exact opposite. This will be going to a friend. But for the monsters, one of our main go-to ones is actually one that was used in the anime, and that is Weathering Soldier. If this card is destroyed by battle or sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can add one Fossil Fusion or one card that specifically lists Fossil Fusion in its text except Weathering Soldier from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Weathering Soldier once per turn. And once per turn, during your end phase, this card loses 600 attack. So being sort of the powerhouse monster on the field, it has amazing setup for your Fossil plays, being able to search out your main go-to fusion spell, which is Fossil Fusion. So having this card early game, or just being able to set it up in the graveyard, which we can easily do with plenty of the different spell and traps we run in the deck. But you definitely want to run 3 of it, being your go-to setup. The earlier you open it up in your hand, the better it'll be for all your plays as well. But for some of the other generic rock support, I just wanted to go with cards that definitely work well on the field and just against your opponent, but then can also be set up in your graveyard to get out all the other fusion monsters we run. So with those ones, I decided to go with 3 Barrier Statue of the Drought, with our main fusion monsters being Earth. Our restriction for our fusion plays isn't really as limited when this card is on the field, but can definitely hurt our opponent and the plays that they want to go for. So having 3 of this just makes for a good normal summon, since we have the fusion option to go for with Fossil Fusion afterwards, since this card uses cards from our graveyard for the fusion play and not so much on the field. So with this card being our normal summon, it can really shut down a lot of our different plays our opponent can do. And more play disruption against our opponent, I'm also running 3 Nibiru, the Primal Being. Given the fact that it does give us a token, would give us a resource normally for fusion plays, but more the fact of, your opponent's going to want to get rid of this card on the field, to redo all their plays that they potentially lost. So they'll set up Nibiru in your graveyard, which then you can use for some of your fusion plays in the deck as a whole, since your Fossil Warrior Skull King needs 1 rock monster and 1 level 7 or higher monster, which Nibiru can fit both of the spots for that if you have this and 1 other card in the graveyard to use. So very useful as a hand trap, but even more useful for the fact that it does help with the engine total also. And I also run, just for more setup, 3 Block Golem. If all monsters in your graveyard are Earth, you can tribute this card to target 2 level 4 or lower rock type monsters in your graveyard except Block Golem. Special summon those targets, but their effects that activate on the field cannot be activated this turn. Even better, just for that setup, because we can go for Drought or Weathering Soldier, depending on which one we want, and just being another rock option for some of the other fusion plays, being a level 4 or lower for Fossil Warrior Skullbone. So awesome play to rely on for that, since Skullbone and also Skull King are 2 of the easier fusion monsters to get out in the extra deck. So Block Golem just helping for the setup, or just being a fusion requirement after you tribute this card in the graveyard afterwards while setting some more important cards on the field, let's say, is very useful also. For more generic rock support, just that definitely helps being one of the higher levels as well. Along with Nibiru, I am running 3 Prime Mineral Congrate. Cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned by by a card effect. If a monster is sent from your opponent's hand or deck to the graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand in face down defense position. If this card is flipped face up, you can target up to 2 cards on the field and destroy them. Now, I gave Block Dragon some consideration, but the fact that you banish so many cards, takes away from your actual fusion plays in the graveyard. So I decided to stick with Prime Mineral Congrate just for an option for special summoning this card with the requirements that this deck is meant to do, just sending rock monsters by that card effect for the special summon as well from the hand. Very easy for that setup on the field, and then once it's set up in the graveyard, you're good to go with all your other plays also. And that is it for the monsters. I wanted to stick, like I said, with just the pure rock setup for everything, and it works very, very well with the testing that I've done for the deck. But for the spells, I want to run 3 of the main fusion spell, which is Fossil Fusion. I have a Polymerization in disguise as a Fossil Fusion until I can find the 3rd copy for my buddy Anthony. But with this one, Fusion summon 1 Fossil Fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from any graveyards except for materials with a specific graveyard requirement listed. If you banish monsters from both graveyards, neither player can target that special summon monster with monster effects. If a face-up Fossil Fusion monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect while this card is in your graveyard, you can add this card from your graveyard to your hand. You can only use this effect of Fossil Fusion once per turn, but that's your recycle power there. As long as you set up Fossil Fusion early game in the graveyard, you can keep on adding it back to your hand to reuse, so you don't have to worry about not having the resource to use this card. It's basically like you're excavating it from the graveyard, not the actual excavate in Yu-Gi-Oh, but actually like with fossils, digging it up and reusing it back into your hand to reuse again. For more of the spell support, which we definitely did have a lot to use in this deck for the overall playstyle, more than the actual monsters, I'm also running 3 Miracle Rupture. You send 1 level 4 lower rock monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then, if Fossil Fusion is in your graveyard, draw 1 card. You can only activate 1 Miracle Rupture per turn, but this is once again your setup for some of your other rock monsters that we run to get their effects and also just give you more draw power and more setup for the deck as a whole. So running 3 of this is definitely useful for that playstyle, and then that extra draw by having Fossil Fusion already in the graveyard is just an extra bonus also. Now, for some of the fusion plays, we have a variety of different levels in the deck, so running 3 Time Stream definitely helps with those fusion plays. You target 1 Fossil Fusion monster you control, attribute it, and if you do, special summon 1 Fossil Fusion monster from your extra deck, whose original level is 2 higher than the monsters, and this is treated as a fusion summon with Fossil Fusion during your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard. You can banish this card and 1 Fossil Fusion monster from your graveyard, then target 1 Fossil Fusion monster in your graveyard and special summon it. So getting that special summon gives you another monster to use on the field, but if there's a Fossil Fusion, that's just a little more difficult to summon out onto the field, being able to use one of your other resources on the field to summon those cards out, make it all the better. So Time Stream gets around some of the fusion plays that might be a little more difficult depending on the deck you're going up against, but all there to save you when you want to go for them specifically. And I also, for the rest of the actual Fossil Fusion support, want to run 3 Specimen Inspection. You reveal 1 Fossil Fusion in your hand, send 1 monster from your hand or graveyard, and if you do, declare 1 type and level. And if your opponent looks at their hand and deck and sends 1 monster with a declared type and level from 1 in the graveyard, if possible, you can only activate 1 Specimen Inspection per turn, but this is just more setup for your opponent to have cards in their graveyard to banish against you. So that setup definitely helps to get a feel of what type of deck your opponent may be playing, but just like I said, you need some cards in your opponent's graveyard to fusion summon out for that play, so having this option available to you makes it so you can get that card into the graveyard to use much faster. For some of the more generic rock support, I'm also running 2 Catapult Zone. Once per turn, if a monster you control will be destroyed by battle, you can send 1 rock-type monster from your deck to the graveyard instead. Being able to send any type of rock monster you want to protect it sets up for Fossil Fusion, but also can keep one of your other Fossil Warrior monsters on the field that much longer to use. And I only run 2. It doesn't really help with any search. It's more of just a protection play, but the 1 Terraforming can help to get it out of the deck faster to use as well. Running 3 was just sort of a dead draw with the hands I had. For some of the one-ofs, I run 1 Foolish Burial and 1 Monster Reborn, more resources to get back onto the field to use, and Foolish Burial sets up the graveyard with any rock monster I need. And more graveyard setup with also destroying some of my opponent's resources. I run 2 Twin Twister, being able to set up the rock monsters from my hand into the graveyard while destroying my opponent's spell and trap card zones or their field spell, you name it, pendulums, and just having that set up is what I like to go for with this card especially. And I also run the 3 Call by the Grave, just because sending to my deck to the graveyard is a big play. So if my opponent Ash Blossoms it, it can really ruin a play I'm trying to go for with Fossil Fusion. So 3 Call by the Grave definitely does help for avoiding that. And for the traps, the only trap I'm running is Rock Bombardment. You select 1 rock-type monster in your deck and send it to the graveyard. Inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent, and then you shuffle your deck. It's just great for the setup. You do burn your opponent for a little bit of damage, but the main point of this card is just to send a rock monster of your choice to the graveyard to use. It's just my favorite trap choice for that, since it has that easy setup for, once again, your only way to fusion summon out by banishing from the graveyard, Fossil Fusion. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck for the fusion monsters. They are a big part of the deck. I run 3 Fossil Warrior Skull King. You need 1 rock monster and 1 level 7 or higher monster, which can easily be met with this card in the deck. It must first be special summoned with Fossil Fusion. This card can make a 2nd attack during each battle phase. And if it attacks a defense monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. And during your opponent's turn, quick effect, you guitar 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard and 1 card. And if you do, special summon that monster on the field. You can use this effect of Fossil Warrior Skull King once per turn. That is definitely an easy go-to monster with all the high-level monsters we're running in the deck, along with the rock monsters to summon this card out with Fossil Fusion. So running 3 of this just means we'll always have the plays to recycle Fossil Fusion, and with Master Rule 5, making it that much easier to summon this card in the main monster zone. I also run 3 Fossil Warrior Skullbone, being one of the lower level ones, since it just needs a level 4 lower and a rock monster for it, and also being able to make 2 attacks as well. And you can banish this card from your graveyard to add 1 time stream from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Fossil Warrior Skullbone once per turn. So searching out time stream to go for sort of the bigger fusion plays definitely helps with the plays, and being an easier 2000 attack point monster that can attack 2 attacks on monsters makes it all the better as well. A little weaker than Skull King, but that's what you get when you use the higher level monsters. Also more difficult, and it has better payoff. I also run 2 Fossil Warrior Skull Knight. You need a rock monster and a level 5 or 6 monster to summon this card out. Must be special summoned with Fossil Fusion. If it attacks a defense monster, inflict piercing battle damage. And also you can activate one of these effects. It can make a 2nd attack in a row, or you can banish this card from your graveyard and target 1 monster on the field and destroy it. But another easy way to get this card out is just to use Skullbone with the time stream to go up 2 levels higher. Since I don't run any level 5s or 6 in the deck, most of the time I just rely on the time stream play to get this card out. I also run 1 Fossil Dragon Skullgios and 1 Fossil Dragon Skullgar. These use cards in my opponent's graveyard just as an added option for the higher level monsters in the deck, so very useful for those plays as well. And I also run 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Barricade Board Blocker, 1 Cross Sheep, and 1 Nightmare Unicorn when I can go for the plays. The Earth monsters, especially if I'm ever going for the Block Golem play, but having these to rely on also helps for sure. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. As for play combos, being able to just set up your graveyard with those rock monsters, then use Fossil Fusion to go into all your different fusion monsters is definitely your main go-to play. But being able to rely on time stream for the rank up is another one you definitely want to focus on. But graveyard setup comes down to being the most important part of the deck, with the weaker strategy being if your opponent has cards like Macros Cosmos or Dimensional Fissure, or any card that can banish from the graveyard, DD Crow, Call by the Grave, and just get in the way of your rock monsters will definitely stop you from getting off some of the more important plays in the deck. But as long as you can avoid that by getting rid of those pesky spell traps on the field with cards like Twin Twister, you won't have any problem going up against your opponent and being able to stop their hand traps as well. But once again, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And I've been doing a lot of deck profiles from Battles of Legend, but also been having a lot of fun making them. So look forward to more in the future. But until then, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And Kira, Twig out.